Hello and welcome to PressTV News Analysis. I'm complicit. On June 8, 1967, the USS Liberty, an American ship in international waters, was attacked without warning by the air and naval forces of Israel, killing 34 U.S. soldiers. Israel's reason? A mistake. And through the aftermath and decades now, the U.S. relation with Israel tighter than ever. But a closer look at this relationship exposes the realities behind what appears to be a cozy, yet somewhat lopsided relationship towards Israel's favor. Why has the U.S. allowed Israel to have penetrated so deeply in its political and internal life? Just some of the questions we'll be asking in this edition of the PressTV News Analysis.
June 8, 1967. The USS Liberty with a crew of 300 was patrolling international waters near the Sinai Peninsula. That was during the Six-Day War between Israel and several Arab nations. Israeli warplanes and boats pounded the ship with cannon, machine gun fire, and torpedoes. Now, 45 years later, a group of survivors are calling for a full investigation into the attack. They say Washington is hiding the truth and falsifying the story. They argue that relations between Israel and the U.S. actually improved after the attack and accuse both sides of taking part in a cover-up.
There's plenty of evidence that is classified that needs to be released, and then let the facts follow where they may, and let the American public make the judgment on this issue. But it's a cover-up, a classic cover-up that betrays the American people.
Here are some facts about the incident, facts which have outraged critics. Among the most notable is comments made by then Secretary of State David Rosk. He said the USS Liberty was flying the American flag and its identification was clearly indicated in large white letters and numerals at the time of the attack. He also said that both the flag and the identification number of the vessel were readily visible from the air. There is every reason to believe that the USS Liberty was identified, or at least her nationality determined, by Israeli warplanes 1 hour before the attack, he said. The subsequent attack by the torpedo boats, substantially after the vessel was or should have been identified by Israeli military forces, manifests the same reckless disregard for human life, Rosk said.
Of course, the reason why Lyndon Johnson and Admiral McCain, the father of John McCain, put the lid on this was the relationship between the Zionist lobby and the American government, which during these 45 years has only become stronger.
So it was significant that, in contrast to his Secretary of State, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson fully accepted the Israeli version of the tragic incident. President Johnson himself only included one small paragraph about the Liberty in his autobiography. He accepted the Israeli explanation of, quote, error in his book. He also minimized the whole affair and distorted the actual number of dead and injured by lowering them from 34 to 10 and 171 to 100, respectively.
Let's find out what our guests think about this. Let me introduce them. We have freelance journalist and a blogger, Michael Santomaro, who joins us from New York. President for the Council for National Interest, Allison Weir, joining us from Sacramento. And from Veterans Today, J. Bruce Campbell joins us from Idaho. I welcome you all. I'd like to start first with you, Michael Santomaro. The USS Liberty incident. Tell us, is there a cover-up on the part of the United States or an error as explained by Israel?
Oh, it was definitely a cover-up. And the reason for the cover-up, in my opinion, is because it's a domestic issue. Anything to do with Israel in the United States, especially with the Democratic Party at the time in the 1960s with Lyndon B. Johnson. According to J.J. Goldberg in his book, Jewish Power, about 45% of the fundraising during the 1960s, 70s, and even currently it's even higher, comes from Jewish PAC money. So you have to understand that whatever is very hypersensitive for Israel is going to be a big, big concern for the Democratic Party here in the United States when it comes to fundraising purposes.
Bruce Campbell, the USS Liberty Memorial website says the survivors of the attack have been forbidden for 40 years to tell their story under oath to the American public. What could be the reason for what appears to be indeed a gag order?
The attack attack on the Liberty was actually an American operation that required the help of the Israelis. The Israelis typically failed miserably in their job of sinking the ship with all 300 or so men on board. The attack was the first part of Operation Cyanide, which required that the spy ship be placed in harm's way just off Gaza and the Sinai during a war, and then attacked by Israeli pilots flying unmarked French fighters. The Americans provided the Israelis with the Liberty's radio frequencies, which the Israelis were able to jam. Then, during the first pass, all of the Liberty's mini antennae were destroyed. There were many miracles that day, but the first miracle was that some radio operators were able to rig a temporary antenna and get out an SOS to the fleet, which was many hundreds of miles away up in the Aegean, I think, on maneuvers. The unarmed Liberty was deliberately sent to die all alone. If the Israelis had been able to sink the Liberty, the next part of the operation would have gone into effect, namely the dropping of nuclear bombs on Cairo and Alexandria, Egypt. The plan was to sink the ship and blame it on Egypt in one of the most treacherous and terrible false flag operations of all time. In fact, fighter bombers from the USS America carrying nuclear weapons were sent to those cities just as the Israelis were attacking the Liberty. When the inept Israeli Air Force and Navy were unable to sink the old refitted freighter, after almost 2 hours of hitting it with everything in their arsenal, the nuking of the Egyptian cities had to be called off. The next part of the operation would have been the U.S. joining the war on the Israeli side and attacking all of Israel's Muslim enemies. Israel, with American military behind it, would have then created Great Israel, stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates rivers. Few people realize what a total catastrophe this failure represented to the Zionist planners. I think the entire centerpiece of the Six-Day War was to have been the, quote, Egyptian sinking of the Liberty and the valiant retaliation by Americans and Israelis to avenge the heroic victims of Egyptian treachery. The USS Liberty was sent by Lyndon Johnson to Israel to be sunk. So I suspect that Operation Cyanide is the most terrible secret that has allowed Israel to blackmail the U.S. government for all these 45 years. It was a joint, super-secret operation between the U.S. and Israel, not a mistake by the Israelis.
Well, Alison Weir, maybe you could explain this relationship.
I strongly disagree.
Okay, I'll get to your disagreement. Hold your thought. Let me bring Alison Weir in here. Alison Weir, I'd just like to get your reflection on this relationship between U.S. and Israel. And I'd like to use one of your quotes from If Americans Knew. History, as you wrote, was titled History of U.S.-Israel Relations, your piece. You said many believe that U.S. support for Israel is driven by the American establishment and U.S. national interest, and some analysts have even stated that facts don't support this theory. Tell us more about that. You further went to say that the reality is that for decades the U.S. opposed Israel, but the U.S. was simply outmaneuvered and eventually replaced.
That's absolutely right. And as the first speaker was starting to say, I too agree with the person who preceded me in much of their analysis. The fact is, what's important to do is to stick to the facts and to call for an honest, thorough investigation of this Israeli attack on a U.S. Navy ship in which they tried to kill 300 Americans. This was perpetrated by Israeli forces. I don't think that Lyndon Johnson was part of the plot. I think he, however, was fully aware that Israel had done it and that it was not an error. That's quite clear. Why is it being covered up? Well, because there is a very, I'm sure all three of us will agree, as any analyst that's looking into this subject understands, there is a very powerful, extremely well-financed and focused Israel lobby in the United States. What many of us did not know, and I didn't know really thoroughly until I've studied it for the past 12 years, is that this has been active in the United States for far longer than most of us realized. Far longer than Israel itself has existed, because it was part of the movement called the Zionist movement to create a Jewish state somewhere in the world. There's been an active lobby pushing for that in the United States, as I wrote in my article, that began in the late 1800s. The U.S. State Department opposed it, the Pentagon opposed it, many patriotic Americans from both sides of the political spectrum have opposed it as being both very harmful to American interests and extremely counter to what most Americans feel that our national principles entail, which is liberty and justice for all. It's this powerful lobby that has kept this Israeli attack on a U.S. Navy ship covered up for 45 years. And it exists at every level. It's not just in Washington, D.C., where I spend a great deal of my time. It's also in Berkeley, California, just recently. The student newspaper there, the Daily Californian, is the campus newspaper for what is often rated as the best public university in the United States, the University of California at Berkeley. Their campus newspaper is refusing to run my letter that would tell about the USS Liberty. Their opinion editor is a young man named Jonathan Cooperberg. All indications are that he tilts toward Israel, and my letter that contains quite a bit of important information. Among the information is information on this historic anniversary about the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, and yet the Daily Californian will not publish that letter. So it's not just in Washington, D.C., it's at little newspapers around the country.
Very revealing how far this goes. Michael Santamaro, I believe you disagreed with our guest. If I caught you correctly, before Alison Weir spoke, you had something to say?
Well, everything that the blogger from Veterans Today said is all it's pure conspiracy, speculation. There's no blackmailing going on. It's anything to do with Israel in the United States is a domestic issue. It has nothing to do with foreign policy. According to J.J. Goldberg, who's also a Jewish American, he wrote a book called Jewish Power. And Richard Cohn of the Washington Post updated the data that J.J. Goldberg had published back in the early 90s, that now 60% of the fundraising for the Democratic Party comes from Jewish PAC money. 35% of the PAC money for the Republican Party comes from Jewish PAC sources. This is a group that is 2 to 4% of the population in the United States. If you count hyphenated Jews, it's probably closer to 3 or 4%. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, it's about 2%. And 40% of the billionaires in the United States are Jewish Americans. This is a very affluent, powerful ethnic group that's very cohesive, and there's no other group in the United States can compete with their cohesiveness when it comes to the issue of Israel or anything to do with the Middle East.
Okay, so we understand in that respect, Bruce Campbell, how influential and deep-rooted Israel is, but when it goes against the interests of the United States, then it becomes somewhat blurred. I mean, let's take, for example, in terms of Israel spying on the United States, it's stated that that's what they do. It's been cited at the annual FBI report. It's called the Foreign Economic Collection and Industrial Espionage. And back in 2005, as an example, it stated Israel has an active program to gather proprietary information within the United States. Doesn't that go counter to U.S. interests? How does that work out? How does that play out? It doesn't seem logical.
No, it's not logical, but that's the way it is. And we saw the exact same thing on 9/11. The only people arrested on 9/11 were either Israelis or American Jews. There were no Arabs arrested on 9/11. And all of these people who were arrested were eventually returned quietly to Israel. I mean, the fundraising has been the same since 1967. Lyndon Johnson was dependent on Jewish fundraising at the time. So nothing has changed
there.
Well, Alison Weir, maybe you could expand a little bit more. What is, within the context of what we were just talking about, what is it that the United States is afraid of when it comes to Israel? I mean, we talk about also other areas that it seems Israel dictates in foreign policy, and that is actually bringing the U.S. into these costly wars. How is it that it just seems like the United States is working for Israel if we look at these facts as they have been cited on numerous publications, websites, etc.?
Mm-hmm. That's right. It's truthfully an extremely unhealthy situation. It's causing tragedy and misery and violence and war after war after war. These massive campaign donations are extremely significant. This is what drives American politics. When you become a congressman in the House of Representatives, you have an election 2 years later to try to get reelected. Every 2 years in the House of Representatives, you have to win an election. In the Senate, it's every 6 years. It is very important to raise campaign donations. They're extremely significant. And this goes long before 1967. When Harry Truman was running for election against Dewey back in the 1940s, both candidates were taking stands in support of Israel, in support of the Zionist position, even though foreign policy experts were recommending against it. You know, this is decades and decades ago. Harry Truman's Secretary of State, General George Marshall, who was a World War II hero, who's very famous for the Marshall Plan, was telling his president, Mr. Truman, if you support Zionism over the interests of the United States, I couldn't even vote for you in the next election. And yet, both parties, politicians from both parties continue to do that. Now, it's important, of course, to always remember, and I'm sure everyone does, that not all Jewish Americans support this. Every mainstream Jewish organization sadly does, from the so-called Anti-Defamation League to AIPAC to Hillels on campuses all across the United States. Every mainstream Jewish organization sadly does support what Israel is doing and often works to hide the USS Liberty incident. However, there are Jewish individuals from the earliest years through today and dissenting Jewish organizations that oppose these actions. So it's important to understand the full picture.
Well, that's what we want to indeed do, Alison. And I'd like to find out from you, Michael Santamar. Is it true that there's a prerequisite for anybody who wants to run for Congress that they have to actually sign a pledge? One of the things in the pledge that Jerusalem al-Quds is the capital city of Israel. Another one that they have to make a commitment to support the military superiority of Israel in terms of the assistance that the United States gives. Is that indeed true? And how is it that something like this has to be in form of a pledge for people who are running for Congress?
Well, it's not a formal pledge where you're signing your name to it, but it's pretty implicit that, you know, you have to give speeches to make it clear to the fundraising crowd that that's going to be your position, that Israel comes first in that region, and no matter if they're right or wrong. If anybody criticizes the United States veto vote in the Security Council, they get marginalized or they get voted out of office. People on Capitol Hill here in the United States and Washington, D.C. are very, very scared of AIPAC, of the Jewish lobby, the Israel lobby. It's the strongest lobby when it comes to foreign policy. They dictate the terms. And it's it's not a conspiracy theory. There's no sloppy thinking involved. It's just a matter of where the money's coming from.
Right, and that appears to be, Bruce Campbell, perhaps one reason, trying to understand again this relationship. I mean, even if it goes counter to U.S. interests, which is something I mentioned, it just puts into question who's running the United States. Israel?
I wouldn't say Israel is running the United States. I would say Jews in America are running the United States. Israel is a euphemism for that. We kind of blame Israel for running the U.S. military and making us attack Iraq and Afghanistan and other Muslim enemies of Israel. It's really American Jews who are behind this, just as it was during 1967 when Lyndon Johnson was president. His chief fundraiser was also the head of one of the studios in Los Angeles. I can't remember his name right now. But this is how the politicians are controlled. I mean, Mr. Santamaro somehow got onto fundraising from the attack on the Liberty, you know, The Liberty attack was a joint American-Israeli operation, nothing to do with fundraising. It was to do with creating greater Israel, Eretz Israel, taking over much of the Middle East and putting under Israeli control. The issue is not fundraising. It is getting millions of Muslims killed, thousands of Americans killed, to kill millions of the Muslims. I mean, this is what American Jews want. This is what they make happen through Washington, D.C. It's very simple. Nothing to do with fundraising. That's just a side issue here.
Okay, Alison Weir, a response to that, please. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. That's an extremist position with which I disagree. For one thing, I don't think it was a joint Israeli-U.S. operation. I haven't seen any evidence for that. The author of the best book on this issue, James Ennis, who was on board the USS Liberty, does not feel that was the case. I disagree with that likelihood. However, I call for a complete investigation. If that's what it was, then we need to know it. Right now, I don't think that's what it was. I don't like to continually use the word American Jews as though it is one monolithic group. There is dissension there, and I think it's important to know that.
Okay, go ahead, Michael Santamaro.
The other thing, though, that I'd like to emphasize...
Michael Santamaro, and then come back to you. Go ahead, Michael.
Sure.
Well, Allison makes a point about the individual Jewish Americans and Israelis. They also get marginalized. Norman Finkelstein, as of 3 or 4 years ago, was banned from visiting Israel for 10 years. So I guess he's got 6 years to go. But if you're an academic and you have very, very strong reasoning abilities where you can influence the public or a segment of the public, you get marginalized. You get marginalized whether you're Jewish individual or a non-Jewish individual in this culture. But getting back to this bizarre theory on the part of Veterans Today or James Bruce Campbell, I've never heard of anything like what he's saying. It sounds preposterous. It's just ridiculous. It's absurd.
Well, let me bring in Mr. Campbell to give a response. Go ahead.
I can't help it if you've never heard of it. The BBC's Peter Hounham wrote a book on this subject called Operation Cyanide, and Operation Cyanide is the American military name for the secret operation to send the Liberty off Gaza to be sunk by the Israelis and blamed on the Egyptians. And so Cairo could be nuked. I mean, the planes were on the way from the USS America to nuke Cairo and Alexandria when the SOS got out, and it became clear that Israel was not going to be able to sink the ship, despite the combined forces of the Navy and Air Force. So they had to say, oh my gosh, this was a mistake. We thought it was the Egyptian horse transport El Qasir. My goodness, how so sorry.
It's absurd.
And so the airplanes were sent back to the America.
Go ahead.
Egypt
quickly.
had an alliance with the Soviet Union at the time. It would have caused World War III. I mean, we had what was.
Well, unfortunately, I got to stop it here since we're fresh out of time. But we're going to invite you back, hopefully, to continue this discussion on a later program. Let me introduce our guests again and thank them: freelance journalist and blogger Michael Santamaro from New York, president of the Council for National Interest, Alison Weir. Thank you from Sacramento, and from Veterans Today, James Bruce Campbell. Thank you. From Idaho. And thank you for watching another edition of the Press TV News Analysis. Questions or comments, do send them. Our email address, newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, and the entire team is goodbye.